The following presentation is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. All of our music and sound effects are provided by our friends and contributors to Pixabay.com. Pixabay.com. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. The following presentation is for mature audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
The Karen Reed trial, the investigation that wasn't. Join with James Buckland and I as we discuss the podcast that we just released from Charlie Crimebuster. We're talking about the investigation that wasn't.
So what did you mean by that, though, Charlie, when you said the investigation that wasn't?
Well, basically what I meant is that there was an investigation, but it wasn't very effective. In fact, if people listen to the podcast this past week, I relayed a number of areas that showed that investigation was very, 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 very short of what it should have been. And so I thought that it might be good for our listeners to be able to see how an investigation really should have happened in the Karen Reed case. Because the sad part about it is, James, we have a cop that's dead. And
right.
We have no justice for that cop.
That's right.
I mean, and the reason is that basically, I mean, what we have here, we have a jury that said not guilty because of reasonable doubt. And so we have John O Keefe's family who have not received justice as a result of that investigation.
Right.
And we also have a bunch of other people that are just scratching their head because we have no idea how he really died.
That's
and
true.
Probably will never because of the investigation that wasn't. So when we say the investigation that wasn't, we're basically saying that was an investigation, but it really wasn't an investigation.
That's right. There were too many errors made during the investigation.
Tons of them.
So what does Monday quarterbacking mean, and why was it important in this case?
Well, I mentioned the fact that I knew that as I did the podcast, and people say, well, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, and those in the sports field know all about that. You have the games on the weekend. You have the football games. When I was playing football in high school and a little bit in college, we would have the game, and then on Sunday afternoon, or Monday rather, we would come back and the coach would play for us the entire game. And, we would see on Monday all the mistakes that we made. And it was so terrible because if you made a mistake, you would stop that film and just play it over and over and over and over and over again, and you'd see it. But the reason why there is Monday morning quarterbacking, and there's a very real good reason for it, is that teams do go back and they look at their past game, and they look at their mistakes and they learn from their mistakes, and
right.
Then they correct their mistakes and they turn their weakness into strength. And that's why it's important for that to happen in this case. And I just hope that law enforcement agencies there in that area are looking back. Now, I know that investigation is somewhat old now because it happened 2 or 3 years ago when this happened, but still, this trial certainly made it very fresh in the minds of law enforcement up there.
Right.
That investigation was very lacking.
Right.
And even, as we said last week, not this week, but the past week in our podcast, that even the Massachusetts State Police said, hey, we're going to learn from this. There's some things we're going to change going forward. And hopefully they will make that change. And hopefully, as a result of it, that there'll be other situations where people will not find themselves lacking justice because of a terrible investigation.
Well, investigations 101, we talk about securing the crime scene as the first thing you do in an investigation. Explain to our audience what that really means.
Well, actually, it's not the very first thing. The very first thing we do when you get on a crime scene is make sure that people are safe,
Well, of course. Yeah.
And if there's if there's an active shooter or something like that, you don't run up there and put tape around while the guy's shooting at you, and if there's somebody that needs medical help and it's really, really critical, you don't. The first thing you want to do is render aid and make sure people are safe. But then after that, the first step in the investigation is basically securing that crime scene. And why that is important is by securing the crime scene, number one, you're protecting the integrity of the investigation. And number two, you are being able to preserve the evidence. And number three, you are keeping any opportunity for that evidence to be manipulated.
Hmm.
And in these situations, it wasn't, and that's why you hear the cries out by several people saying that they believe the police planted evidence. I don't believe they did, but other people do, and I can see why they believe that. They believe that because there was the opportunity to do so, simply because the crime scene wasn't secured,
Right,
and it could have happened. You
right,
know.
right. Yeah. So you mentioned the Kohlberger case in the podcast. Does that still apply in that he is accepting a plea now?
That was a shocker, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a shocker.
Yeah, this week we heard that he flee. But and I mentioned the Kohlberger case a couple times in the podcast because I thought that it was a very good investigation to be able to learn by, and I think that if anything, the fact that he did the plea proves that what I said was correct, and that the investigation was good because the investigation was so solid, so strong that the defense realized that they could not really stand up to it.
Right,
And so, rather than fight it, they wanted to try to get the death penalty off the table, and they began to say, okay, we're going to do a deal, and they did that deal. So my connotation on that is that yes, it does apply to this case because Karen Reed was ready to fight this case because she knew our attorneys knew that there were all kind of holes in the case.
yeah,
Whereupon, on the other hand, with Kohlberger, I think they realized that they could have fought it all they wanted to, but the case was so solid that they would probably lose in the meantime. And not only would they lose, but there was a really great possibility that he would get the death penalty. So yes, I think that is a really good example to our listeners on what a good investigation will do for a case rather than a sorry investigation as this one was.
yeah. It's interesting. The on the Kohlberger case, the Idaho killings, the entire case was secured first and foremost. They got those that they made sure that those were still there were taken care of and were safe. Then they secured the scene.
Right?
They kept everything very close to their chest. They
Yeah.
didn't reveal a lot of things. They
Right.
didn't text it on their phones. They didn't pick it up with solo cups.
That's right.
They
They
didn't
didn't
use
use
a
that.
leaf
Yeah.
blower.
Yeah. Right. All of that. Yeah. Yeah.
So all of that, and it just goes to show the difference between how Moscow, Idaho handled their case versus the way that it was handled in Canton, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and one of the things you saw in that is that they extended that crime scene. In other words, they didn't, well, for all we know, it appears that the crime happened inside the house there.
Right,
But they didn't just use the house to secure it. They
right,
went out into the yard. And not only did they go out in the yard at first, they extended beyond the yard into surrounding areas. And that's the
right,
way you do investigation. You get out as far as you can where you think evidence may be, and then you start working your way back, in securing the scene. But if you recall, if you watch that, and this, by the way, people are saying, well, the Massachusetts State Police, they had a problem because there was snow on the ground and it was cold and all that. But the same thing happened in Coburg. There was snow on the ground there,
exactly,
and it was
exactly.
cold. And I saw many times when I was watching some of the news channels and seeing some of the pictures, you saw a police car parked out there, and you saw police officers out there weeks and weeks and weeks beyond
Right,
the case, and
right,
they were there to guard that crime scene. They were securing the crime scene,
right.
and they kept it. I mean, they really kept it a long time, and we know now that because they secured it, that's why we really have a good solid case there. And boy, how different that was from this one, right?
Uh,
I mean, people. people could come and go on that lawn. I mean, it
Yeah.
was wide open. There wasn't any tape or anything like that. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
and then that's really really sad because um, anybody could have come and planted any kind of evidence there,
Exactly.
and there it leaves that open to that. I mean, think about this. You have a one of the chiefs near there driving down the road a week or so after that, looks over in the yard and sees a piece of taillight and goes and grabs it. But
Yeah,
he's driving down the road. He's just going down the road. The thing is not secured. People were coming and going as they wanted to, so no wonder there was great suspicion upon, hey, why are there taillight pieces there? I mean,
exactly.
if that had been secured, and then not only secured, but also if they gathered the evidence correct, then we might have a different ball game. But it wasn't, unfortunately.
Well, Charlie, what did you mean by the crime log?
Well, it is best practices in investigations that would never, and anybody that's even watched any crime dramas probably have seen this time and time again. What you do is you secure the scene and then you keep a log. In other words, everybody that comes and goes on that scene, you sign them in, you sign them out, and you say how long they were there, and that way we know how many people were on that lawn and when they were on that lawn,
Right.
and you can know how people are going. And also, you know that there are certain people that should not be there, and you move them out of the way. So a good crime log will let you know everybody's there. All we know is that these police officers said, "Well, I went here on this day and I found this, and I went there on that day and found that," but there's no crime log to indicate
Right.
that they did any of that. It's just
Exactly.
all we do is we take their word for it, right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately today, just giving the word of a police officer, it doesn't do it. You've got to have some way to log it. Now, if there had been a log and we knew who went where and when they came and that sort of thing, who was coming and going, we would know a whole lot about it. I mean, for instance, we know Higgins was a third party person. How many times did he come back and forth there? We don't know because there
Uh,
was no log.
well,
Uh,
there was certainly a log at the police station how many times he went in
yeah,
and out there,
yeah,
even
they
after
found
being
that.
out in and
Yeah,
out all day,
yeah,
and
yeah.
all
But
night practically.
but
Yep.
on the crime scene, there's no crime logs. That's what we mean
No.
about crime log.
Yeah.
We just keep that log and keep it in that area.
Well, we're going to take a real short break, and we'll have the crazy crook story when we come back.
Here at Charlie Crimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. Reach out with a shout out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com, and also thank those of you who already support our podcast. Did you know that your donations not only help with this podcast, but also support the brave men and women, first responders, law enforcement, correction officers, security personnel, and our military? You too can donate, as well as become a monthly badge member. That's BADGE member by simply subscribing to PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we would like to encourage you to binge-cast by listening to our podcasts located on many of the popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or you can ask your smart speaker to play Charlie Crimebuster. But since you're streaming us here on YouTube tonight, simply click on the subscribe button and you'll be notified each time we drop a new episode. So please do us that huge favor and press that subscribe button right now. And we thank you.
Well, James, we never we never run out of Florida men, do we?
We never do.
We never do. And this, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, ladies and gentlemen, is another Florida man. And I don't know. Seemed like we got something going now with Teslas, because this happened to be a Florida man that was in the Tesla and his electric car, and he needed a charge, and he was so crazy that he just decided in the middle of the night that he would drive his car through a restaurant to try to find some place to charge his car. And again, you can't make it up, right?
No,
I
you can't
mean,
make it up.
this idiot, in West Palm Beach, had a very popular restaurant there, and they, he was on camera, and he was driving his car in there to try to move tables around to try to find some place to plug in his vehicle,
Wow.
which is really really crazy. And as a result of that, unfortunately, he got busted for breaking and entering, and he got busted for theft of property, I guess, if he got some electricity there, And so this guy's in a heap of trouble, all because he did something very dumb and very stupid. So, folks, this guy, he decided that, he was going to go to the restaurant, and just charge his car up that way. But restaurants aren't for that. So if you have an electric vehicle, folks, use a little common sense, right?
That's right.
So that's
That's right.
all about our crazy crook this week, man. I just can't believe it keeps happening here in Florida.
Well, back to our topic. Please inform our listeners how important it is to have photograph evidence. How critical that is to
Well,
in any case.
yeah, in any case, but there was two or three times in this case where this was just really, really critical. One of the times, of course, and probably the most important time, was when they went to seize Karen's car at her father's house.
Right.
And the other officer that was there from another jurisdiction, who, upon his testimony under oath, said when he saw the car, the tail light had a crack in it, about the size of $1, I think he said. But he said it wasn't a shattered tail light. But then when they showed him the picture on the stand of how that tail light was in the Sally Port of the Canton Police Department, he testified that wasn't the same tail light. He said that wasn't the way it looked when we got there. That
Right.
wasn't it.
Right.
Now, of course, Brennan came back, the prosecutor, and did, I think, score a few points on his memory. It's a long time ago. Are you sure? Blah 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 that. But just think, James, if they had, before they touched that vehicle, if they had taken photographs
Yep.
of all the car, and especially that tail light,
Yep.
then the trial, the jury, and all of us would know whether this officer is telling the truth or not about how that taillight looked then compared to the way it looked at the Canton Police Department.
Chain of custody.
Yep, chain of custody. And
Yep.
and and if they had a picture of that, they could do it. Same thing was true when they were out there picking up these pieces of taillight on the lawn.
Right.
If that had happened at a certain time, you photograph it where it is. You don't pick it up first. You photograph it first,
Exactly.
and then then you have a date on when that photograph was taken, and that's the way it looked at that time. So to photograph a see, and that's why I think it's so important. Even if these guys had body cameras on and they had been working.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's another plus for body cameras. I mean, I think body cameras. Sometimes when this was first introduced to law enforcement, some of the guys probably didn't like it so much and thought, boy, I don't have any privacy or all this sort of thing, even though you can activate it and deactivate it. But to me, body cameras does more to protect the police officer than it does the public.
If it's vindicated and
Yeah, yeah,
eradicated anything that had anyone even tried to or even alleged because
yeah.
they've got evidence.
It's right there. And
Yeah.
and if these guys had a body camera on, if this officer had a body camera on, walked right up to that tail light, and had it on, then
Exactly.
we would know how it looked, that sort of. But we don't see any body we don't see any body cameras used on this. Another good example. Go back to another case that we covered, which was the Lori Vallow case.
Yes.
When the detectives were in there and they were interviewing her, they had body cams.
They did.
And several times in this case, they would be examined under cross-examination. The defense attorney would say, "Well, now, you said this," and they would come back and say, "I didn't say this."
Hmm.
And he was reading, the defense attorney, he was reading from the police officer's report. In the police officer's report, it said this person said so and so.
Right.
But when she or she was on the stand, they said, "No, I didn't say that." So how do we know? I mean,
Exactly.
is the police report right, or is the witness right? We don't know. But if you had recorded that, either by body camera or even recording their statement, then you could say, okay, let's find out what really happened. Let's play the
Right.
recording.
Right.
And yes, you did say that, and
Yeah.
but or we could say, hey, the police officer was wrong. You didn't say that. We know you didn't say that because we just heard the recording. You never said that. He wrote something in that report that was false.
Exactly.
So again, these are I call them very big little things that can make a difference. So there are certain times I will say that maybe you wouldn't record a statement. And one of those times would be when you're first talking to somebody, if they're reluctant to talk at all, and you think recording them would scare them away, then maybe you want to get a statement without recording it. But then if you want to really preserve the record, you would want to come back and say, now can we have your permission to record this,
Right. Right.
on that. But there are certain times when I think it would be to the advantage not to bring a recorder out if you have a reluctant witness who's reluctant to talk at that moment. Get them talking, and then afterwards ask if you could record it. I think there's ways to do that.
Well, another good example is even audio recording. The young lady that said that uh, uh, Karen Reed said, "I hit him. I hit him." You and I discussed this in one of our podcasts about our crime
Yeah.
talks about the
Oh,
inflection of the voice. If she said, I hit him," in a question mark way, or if she said,
yeah.
I hit him, the inflection in the voice does make a difference, and if they had to play that, it would be more of a question. She say, as if, did I hit him? You know,
Right. Yeah.
because she
Yeah.
did say that, she went on to say, did I hit him?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, so but it's really amazing to me that the Massachusetts State Police, which is a very elite organization that I have a lot of respect for, it's just really interesting to me that in all these interviews, I don't know that any of them were recorded. I haven't heard of any of them that were recorded.
well, do
And
investigators have to record your statement?
no, no, that's not. It's not a law that you have to do it. But again, what you and I have just pointed out, it sure is a good thing to do it because then you can establish the record for sure,
Exactly.
and you won't have anybody saying, "Well, you're saying something that I didn't say," because you have it right there, as you go. And I think it's really important. And another thing and when we talk about the witnesses in this trial. The witnesses were not separated. One of the first things you do
That's true.
after you secure the scene and if you're interviewing witnesses, you separate the witnesses. You always do that. That's just the best practice, and that's for a couple reasons. Number one, you and the other thing that I thought was very lacking here was the urgency of getting to all these people and interviewing these people. Some of these people weren't interviewed till 6 months later, and eight
Right.
months later, and almost
Right.
a year later for one person. So there's a reason why there's a show called 48 Hours, because
Exactly.
those first hours are really, really critical. They're really critical in order to preserve evidence. And then you want to separate the witnesses because you don't want the witnesses getting together and trying to figure out that they're all going to say the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, seldom do people always see it the same way, and seldom do people always say it the same way. And in this trial, Alan Jackson said, I believe, particularly to Jan McCabe, you told these investigators you talked to them, but before you did, you went and you called some other people,
Yep. Yep.
and what did you talk about? Well, she tried to say, but we know what she talked about.
Of
She
course.
said, "Hey, these police are here. What did you say?" Well, what do you say? So that everybody's on the same page.
Exactly.
And sometimes when everybody's on the same page, that's a red flag in of itself. But one of the reasons why you separate witnesses and you get to them fast is you don't want them to be able to get together and try to come up with their own thing because I can color how you see something if I talk to you about something,
Right.
and you can color how I see something if you talk about something. But what
Exactly.
we really want to hear it unfiltered. We want to know what James saw, and we want to know what Donnie saw. We
Right.
don't want to know what each of you, kind of helped color it or helped each other to come to the same conclusion. We want to see it through your eyes as you saw it then. And so that's why it's really important to separate witnesses and to really interview them accordingly.
Well, the investigation started off bad in the first place because, as it was, the Proctor factor, the Inspector Proctor, was
Hmm.
friends of the Alberts,
Yep.
and he should have
Yep.
recused himself from the investigation altogether.
No doubt about it. I mean, he was close to the Alberts, and on top of that, he was just so biased against her.
Exactly.
And it was so hard for me to take that these guys actually got up and said, okay, yeah, he did that, he did say that, he did say, but it really doesn't matter. It
Yeah,
does matter,
it does matter, of course.
yeah,
Of course, it
I mean,
matters.
because this guy's biased. He's not going to look at it from an independent source because as a
Jeez.
police officer, I'm there to find out what really happened. I'm not there to take sides for anybody.
Exactly.
I'm there to find
Exactly.
out what happened. And
Well,
and some people say, well, uh, these guys were cops. That's all the more why we ought to make sure that they are cleared.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of cops, we have an ATF agent. How
Yeah.
would Hitman Higgins?
I love your name for him, man. I love your name.
Well,
Yeah.
to that point, how would you have investigated Hitman Higgins?
Well, there were so many things that should have been done with Higgins. And even I mean, it would have even been good for him if he's innocent. These things should have been done. But the first thing, that we would have done, we would have taken his statement like we take anybody else's statement, and we would have done it very early along the line, and we would have tried our best to get to his phone very quickly. Because they delayed in getting to his phone, you know what he did with his phone, right? He went to the
Absolutely. Yeah,
military base, destroyed his phone.
exactly.
And you say, well, but he did, before he did that, he brought out the copies of the texts that he had with Karen and with Brian. But I mean, since when do suspects or people of interest get to pick and choose what you see? As an investigator, you want to see it
Exactly.
all. What did he not show, right? What did he
Exactly.
not show? And then there were so many other things. I mean, that visit at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to the police station. I mean, think about this. We know they had all been drinking, right?
Yep.
And are you going to go to a police station if you've been drinking? Are you going to walk
Exactly.
around with alcohol? So that's very suspicious in
No, he was
itself.
there all day.
Yeah, yeah. He was
Yeah.
drinking, and then he went back at 2 or 3 o'clock, and then. But the
Yeah.
other thing on top of that is that what I would have asked at that point is because I think that looks a little suspicious. It may not be, but one of the things I would do to determine is I would ask, how many times, have you gone to the station at 3 o'clock in the morning to do
Exactly.
investigation work?
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, is this a habit that you
It's
have? Do you do that quite often? Or are you an early morning guy and you show
uh-huh.
up at 3 o'clock every morning? Because I doubt that happened. And I would have checked those logs too, way back, and say,
Yeah.
so you say that you went there to do administration work, but you've never done that
Well, now
before.
those questions you just posed were objected to and sustained by the
Yeah,
judge because
yeah, but you could do it though in an investigation when you're talking to him, because no
yeah,
judge is going to sustain anything. But I don't think he was ever questioned that way. He was never questioned. I think in a neutral way. I think that unfortunately they just gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was a cop,
exactly.
and that's very sad because if you get back to it, Brian Albert, he was on the stand, and they asked him, well, did they search your house? And if you remember, he said, no, I wish they had.
Hmm.
And you think about this, if I was innocent, I would wish that they had searched my house too to prove it.
Yeah.
But now we don't know. Was he innocent? We don't know. Why? We don't know Because they never searched the house, you know.
Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
mean, anything he said. So I would have done that. Something else I would have done with Higgins too, because the I guess it was alluded to anyhow with the defense that Higgins may have been a jealous lover. I would have probably gone back and tried to find out who else he's dated, if he has, other relationships,
Yep.
and had he ever had
Yep.
a tendency to be jealous, had
Right.
he ever been violent in a relationship,
Yeah.
all that.
Profiled him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all these things that is investigation 101 that was never really ever done, I
Exactly.
I would have gone through his car. I would have also searched, that Escade, that Ford Escade of Albert's, because
Exactly.
according to the snowplow guy, it was pulled out in front of the house
Uh-huh.
when the snowplow went out. Well, if that car was put, why was it put there? And let's look at it. Think about this: if they had done that house search correctly, if they had brought the crime technicians in, if they had looked for blood, blood on clothes, blood on the floor, blood anywhere, if they had checked for blood on shoes, if they had checked for DNA anywhere, because we all leave DNA everywhere we go, right?
Absolutely.
So think with
Absolutely.
me. If they had done that and they had found in that house John O'Keefe's blood or John O'Keefe's DNA, then we have a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. Yep.
then we can prove that he went in that
He
house.
was in the house. Yes.
Yeah, if that's there, because he'd never been there before, to my knowledge, so there's no reason for his DNA to be in there
Correct.
other than the fact that he went in there that night. But James, we'll never know because there was an investigation that wasn't.
Exactly.
They never investigated that.
Well, tell us about the investigation that was.
Well, yeah. This is a crazy case because not only was there an investigation that wasn't, there was an investigation that was. And this is astonishing to me. I've never seen a case like this where the investigation was investigated simultaneously while the investigation was going on. And yet it
Hmm.
happened here.
Yeah.
Now we do know that the FBI and one thing I wanted to know right off the bat and tried to find out is what prompted the FBI to go in there and investigate that investigation.
Exactly.
So,
My question as well.
yeah, the only thing I can pick up is that they said that the FBI and an attorney up there had said that the FBI had been investigating the law enforcement agencies in that area, particularly the state police and others, quite a bit. And in the 80s and 90s, this sort of thing, I think there was a whole lot of corruption
Uh-huh.
with the Massachusetts Boston Police Department, the Massachusetts State Police, and this sort of thing. And even of late, there was some corruption because there were state troopers and police officers that were actually turning in overtime hours that they never worked.
Wow.
Now, and that's and then the and they had recently been charged, several of them with that. So,
Right.
I mean, if you have an officer and that happens, then if he's dishonest about that, how do you know he's honest about anything else that he's investigating?
Exactly.
Investigating. It's like Grady Judd says here in Florida. He says our deputies, our people, I don't. They have to have a higher standard than anybody else.
Yeah.
Because they're investigating people, and
Exactly.
and he does. I mean, that I'm not saying that with 1,000 officers you never have a bad apple, but I guarantee you when he finds that bad apple, he throws it away, and
Absolutely.
sometimes he puts it in jail,
Yeah.
even an
Yeah.
officer. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're with Grady Judd in Polk County and you're a police officer and you do anything illegal, you're going to go to jail.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nobody's going to turn their head.
No.
You're going to go to jail, and that was happening up there. So they had already been investigating those kind of things. So I think it just kind of lends into the fact that hey, there's some things have been said about this investigation. Let's take a look at this investigation. But I do think we need to say, in fairness, James, that in that investigation to this point, they have found the investigator, the FBI, the federal investigation did not find that any police officer did anything illegal. It did not find that any of the witnesses did anything illegal. In fact, the witnesses that went before the grand jury that were in that house were consistent with their own testimony that John O'Keefe did not go in that house. So this investigation did not show us anything that was corruption as far as illegalities, but it does say to everybody out there that you do not investigate something like a police department unless there's some probable cause to cause you to do it, right?
Correct.
So there is some doubt that's in our mind already, because why else would the federal government be investigating an investigation?
Exactly.
So, unfortunately for the prosecution and fortunately for the defense, that brought a treasure chest of evidence that the defense could use in this case. Because had it not been for the federal investigation, we may not have heard from ARCA,
True.
because they were actually hired by the federal investigation,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they brought all kinds of stuff to the defense that the defense could use, because everybody that I've talked to or heard talking tells us that the ARCA investigators were highly esteemed, and they certainly offset anything that the prosecution did in their own accident construction.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Well, I have a bonus question for you.
Okay, let it rip.
Can I perjure myself if I have a false memory?
Well, apparently not, because we had somebody testify, didn't we?
We did.
A police officer. I still can't get over that. You get on the stand and you say, "Well, I said that, but
Yeah.
it was a false memory."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We commonly call that a lie.
Yeah, I can't wait until my wife tells me I'm lying sometimes. I say, "No, honey, I'm not lying. That was just a false
memory."
That's true, man. It really is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the show today, Charlie. It was great. Thank you.
Had a great time talking, and look forward to next week. And we know that this is around the 4th of July, so we certainly want to hope that all our folks stay safe out there, especially around the fireworks, and
Right.
especially around those who still make very bad mistakes and drive and drink.
Yeah.
So watch out for those people out there, and for goodness sakes, don't do it. So till this time next time, this is James Buckler, myself, wishing you a happy 4th of July, a safe one, and telling you to be safe, be alert, for the life you save might be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional information and podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.